Hey folks, Iolair here, and welcome to my review and first impressions of the USS Florida. This is the brand new premium Tier 7 US Navy battleship that's been introduced in Update 099, and so far I have quite liked this ship. I think she's got some good strengths, but she also has some important limitations, but I'll get to those soon enough. Now, as I've been doing with most of my recent ship reviews, I have gameplay, in this case from the first and fourth matches I had with her. I will then go to port to talk about her specifications in more detail, talk about my ship build, and maybe some options that you might want to consider. And I'll have some final thoughts. As usual, I will leave an index for the video in the description below so you can jump around as you'd like. So the Florida, this is a partial paper design. It's based on a design proposal that ultimately led to the North Carolina class. I don't know how much of the ship was designed or maybe prototyped. Maybe the guns were, I don't know. Speaking of which, she fires 12 356 millimeter guns, which is relatively small for this tier. And that's part of the reason that you're seeing me fire a lot of HE. Now, we've also just witnessed one of her key limitations is she has quite weak armor. She has a 25 millimeter bow and stern in contrast to the 26 millimeter for most of the Tier 7 battleships. She also has a 26 millimeter upper belt, which means that she's going to eat a lot of penetrating damage from battleship AP. Pretty much at any tier, whether tier 5, 6, or higher. So that is, like I said, one of her limitations. However, one of her strengths is her AA. In fact, that's part of the reason I'm showcasing this match as I get the kill on the Baltimore. I shoot down, I think, a total of 27 planes in this match. She does carry the defensive fire consumable as well. And so she is pretty competent on the AA front. In fact, I'm trying to help my allied destroyers here with the AA and shoot down this squadron before she can get her drop off. Yeah, I think I do. So she, in addition to the large number of shells she could put in the air, she does have decent AA. She is also reasonably, she's got decent speed. Her base speed is 27 knots, and with a speed signal, she can get up to a little over 28 knots. So there's a lot of aspects about her that are quite playable. However, because she has relatively smaller caliber, I thought when I first started playing her, in fact, I do this for most of the first three matches I played, I expected to fire a lot of HE because I was kind of thinking, okay, is this going to go the way of the King George and the Duke of York, which are the Royal Navy Tier 7 battleships that are very well known for firing HE and do quite well doing that. But however, because the Florida does not get the 1/4 penetration benefit that the Royal Navy battleships get on their HE, it so far for me did not work out too well. And so for the fourth match, which I'm going to switch to here fairly shortly, in fact, I'm doing it right now, I decided to fire mostly AP, and I'm glad I did because I got much better results. And we'll see that again at the end of the game, and I'll have the post-match results at the end of the video as well, so you can look at those details. Now, I do think that in the cases where she is up tiered, and that is going to happen more regularly now with the modified matchmaking, tier 7 ships tend to see more up tiering. If you're going to be firing at well angled, highly armored upper tier battleships, it may be necessary to fire a HE more regularly. In fact, because of her armor limitations, and her relatively limited health pool. She has only 51,800 hit points for a tier 7 battleship, which is not that great. I think you will find that you will want to play her more like a big heavy cruiser in a lot of ways when badly up tiered. Use the range, which I'm going to talk to a little more about here in a moment, and use terrain and sort of cruiser tactics to get the most out of her, because she is not going to compete well against upper tier battleships that have better armor and better guns. So think of her in some ways like kind of like a Scharnhorst in that way. In fact, she has actually quite worse armor than a Scharnhorst, but in terms of the play style, it's not, I don't think it's going to be too dissimilar to that. Now, speaking of range, now you may have noticed that in the build card that I showed in the first minute of the video, I actually showed two upgrades that I leveraged in the third upgrade slot. So in the first battle I played with her, I took the main battery modification 2 upgrade, which improves turret traverse, um, because her base range is just shy of 19 kilometers. And she also gets a spotter plane. So I was thinking at the time, okay, that probably is going to work out okay. If I need the extra range, I can just pop the spotter and etc. But what I found, especially since I got into tier 9 matches for the second and third battles that I played in her, that not having the additional range was in some cases quite inconvenient. So starting with the second match, I switched from the main battery modification 2 upgrade in slot 3 to the artillery plotting room upgrade, in which the only the U.S. Navy battleships have access to for slot 3, and that improves the range of their guns by 16%. So now her range is out to 21.6 kilometers, I think it is. So that for me gave me a lot more options in terms of positioning and how to fire and so on. In fact, her concealment's actually quite decent at 12.1 kilometers. And that doesn't even include the concealment system upgrade that Tier 8 and higher battleships receive. So she can be reasonably stealthy and have a very good margin between her maximum firing range and her detection range, which can give her some very good flexibility. And I would encourage you that if you do pick her up, that you look at taking the artillery plotting room upgrade in slot 3. All right, so I think that's going to cover sort of her general play style for now. Let me talk about this particular match and part of the reason that I wanted to showcase it. So this is an all tier 7 battle. As my colleague Angry Ace in the Surrey just took a big wallop from something. I don't remember what it was. But the joke we use is that when you take a big hit like that, it's a reload boost because you usually have adrenaline rush. But I featured this replay because I felt like I was being quite effective in my positioning, and this is a good reflection of what the Florida potentially can do. So in this particular match, we secured Alpha and we secured Bravo, and what we're trying to do is keep the opponents from moving into Alpha, and right now we don't have too much of a threat for that happening. I have Jimmy Jazz, who's my other division mate in the Haida, who's sort of floating between the Alpha and Bravo caps to keep an eye on things, chase down any destroyers. In fact, they still have one out there. I don't remember what. Oh, he was back up at Charlie. This is after Jimmy Jazz had taken down the destroyer that was over at Alpha. So my role here in being in the mid, which I think the Florida can do quite well, allows me to be able to fire in both into both cap areas. Again, I have decent concealment. I have very good range. And the speed, which I don't think I've talked about, is a base speed of 27 knots, which is the same as the North Carolina. And for a lot of players who are moving up the U.S. Navy battleship line, C is a sort of a giant level of relief when they move out of the Colorado and it's glacial 21 knots, I think it is. Compared to the North Carolina at 27. The Florida also gets 27, and with a speed signal, she can get up to a little over 28 knots, which is entirely playable. So you can see here that I'm able to put fire into both cap areas, both Alpha and Charlie, to help defend those areas, put fire on targets that needed. Now, I do have some salvos where I'm firing at somewhat angled targets, and I get a fair amount of bounces when I'm firing AP, and that's the places where I kind of groan and I'm like, should I have been firing HE at that point? So you can see I'm really eager to fire on this Nelson who's flat broadside, and I'm trying to predict to see if he's going to stay there, but I think he starts turning in here. And so I'm going to go back to, I think ultimately back to the sit-up because he's lower health. But I end up getting a fair number of bounces in some cases, and again, I'll feel like maybe I should have fired HE. And that will also go over to one of the build choices that I made, or I've been making on some of my battleship builds as of late, is to start investing more into expert loader, which is something that I've traditionally used on cruisers and on some battleships with smaller calibers like the Scharnhorst. But I typically, for the bigger caliber battleships, I have tended not to take expert loader, but I've decided that it's actually becoming quite effective, especially if you have a commander like John Doe, which I am running. This is from my Montana. That having the buffed expert loader talent or skill can be very advantageous to be able to switch back to a different ammo type if you have a preferred target where you really should be firing AP to catch a broadside, or you need to switch to HE quickly because you're now running into a destroyer or something like that. That I would recommend on a build for the Florida is to have expert loader because of, again, the smaller caliber guns and being able to switch between calibers or between ammunition types quite efficiently. As I take down the take down the Gneisenau. Now we're going to get into a situation where this is where I think the Florida will tend to struggle more as a battleship. I am facing 406 millimeter guns from the Nelson. Now the Nelson is a notoriously squishy battleship, flat broadside. I'm like itching to fire at this guy, and then I see the Sinop here, who's lower health, and I once the Nelson started turning away, and I realized I was not going to be able to get a broadside shot. I figured, okay, I better fire on the Sinop, and I actually get a pretty decent hit, almost 7,000, and thankfully one of our allies, our Gneisenau, finishes off the Sinop. But I think in close combat situations like this, the Florida will fare quite poorly. She does not have the armor scheme to sort of brawl, if you will. She takes a lot of penetrating damage. Again, anything at 380 millimeters or above is just going to pen right through her bow, through her upper belt, with no problems. And the Nelson carries 406 millimeter guns. Now I'm waiting for the Nelson here because he's going to be forced to turn or run around, and then I'll be able to fire on him. Now, one other comment I haven't made here on our guns that I think a lot of people are aware of is that the Florida has a 33.5-second reload, which some people kind of felt frustrated or unhappy about because this was a nerf to her during testing. But I think for a ship that fires 12, has 12 rifles, a 33.5-second reload is not too unreasonable for what she can potentially do. And here I'm going to get a salvo off and finish off the Nelson as he pens me through the bow and finishes me off. So I'm going to switch to the port, and we'll talk about her specifications and my build. Okay, here we are in port with the Florida, and starting with her armor, which I talked about a fair amount during the replay. 25 millimeter bow and stern, which is 1 millimeter smaller than most Tier 7 battleships. So from that perspective, it's not that material. But the big deal to me is the upper armor belt is only 26 millimeters, which means anything 380 and larger, regardless of angle, is just going to punch right on through. And she's going to eat a lot of penetrating damage. And with a relatively limited health pool, which I'll touch on here shortly, means that she has to manage, you have to manage her very closely if you're going to play her. Again, you're going to be in situations where you're going to want to play mostly from mid or potentially long range. You want to play her a little more like a cruiser when being up tiered, so you manage your engagements more carefully because she just doesn't have the same survivability and same armor as a lot of her peers. Her citadel is actually quite low in the waterline. It sits slightly below the waterline, but it's quite large. And I have citadeled Floridas in my own Florida. So it's not completely protected. I mean, it definitely can be breached when broadside. but it's not quite as exposed as some other battleships that have higher citadels. Next, survivability, which I just mentioned. The health pool is quite small at 51,800 compared to a lot of her peers. When she was first being tested, her in her original incarnation, it was around 63,000. So it's been reduced quite significantly. And again, this is something that you have to keep in mind if you're going to play her around how to manage her engagements. She's definitely not going to be, a frontline brawler type of battleship. Uh, Torpedo protection is not that good at 26%. So again, something to keep in mind. Guns. So I mentioned this during the replay. She fires 12 shells. Her reload is 33 and a half seconds. That was nerfed. Originally it was 30 seconds, and then it was nerfed to 31 and a half, and then to 33 and a half. I wouldn't get too upset about that for folks that were looking forward to this ship. Her DPM is very commensurate with her peers. So her AP DPM is about 205,000 hit points per minute, compared to most of the other tier 6 or tier 7 battleships are in the 200 to 210,000. Even the Sinop, which is widely praised as a very strong battleship, her DPM is 211,000 per minute. So it's commensurate, within 5% of most of her peers. So I wouldn't be too worried about the reload in terms of her playability. She does have some secondaries. She has some single barreled secondaries, but she's also got the double barreled Mark 12s that are very common on the mid and upper tier U.S. Navy battleships, and these act as dual purpose AA, which I'll get to here in a moment. So she does have secondaries, but again, she's not, I wouldn't recommend going into brawling situations. Main battery range, I talked about this during the replay. Her base range is 18.8, I think. And I have the artillery plotting room upgrade now in slot 3, which gets her range out to 21.6. And like I said, for me and my experience with her, having the extra base range made a big difference in positioning options and how to play her. All right, getting to AA. This is one place where she actually is, in my opinion, is quite strong. Again, I tend to ignore this number that, to me, sort of dilutes the how to measure the AA. Although I will say that for purposes of tier 7 battleships, this is a very high number. What I will look at is the continuous damage and the range. So the range is 5.8 kilometers, which is decent. The continuous AA is 318. The short range is very good. The mid range is good. The long range is okay. It's definitely usable. So I found that her AA is quite good. She will definitely handle herself I won't say straight up very easily, but she will handle tier 6 planes quite effectively. Tier 8, she will struggle with a little more, but I found that she's quite competent. Plus, she does carry the defensive fire consumable as well. So definitely a bright spot for her in terms of her playability. And in fact, that's actually kind of an important point, because if she's playing more at mid and longer ranges, she might be a little more isolated relative to some of her allies, or she will want to play with, she may not be as close, I should say, to some of her allies. And so having the extra AA may be useful in that case. Talked about her maneuverability. Her base speed is 27 knots with the speed signal is 28.4. Her turning circle is very good. 760 meters. That's quite small for a tier 7 tier 7 battleship. And rudder shift at 15.4 seconds is playable. That's a pretty decent rudder shift. So she's reasonably maneuverable. Concealment was another area that I found that she was quite strong. So even though she doesn't carry the concealment system upgrade in slot 5, or she can't, getting her surface detection down to 12.1 kilometers is quite strong. And again, with a nearly 22 kilometer firing range, that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of positioning and being able to disappear between salvos if you need to and you need to disengage. Again, with the relatively low health pool and weak armor, being able to disengage and disappear is something that is important in ships. All right, so getting to my upgrades. Let me do that next. Main battery modification 1, again, I wouldn't take any other option. For slot 2, normally most battleship players take the damage control system upgrade to reduce the chance of flood and fire. You could take the defensive A fire consumable to increase the action time of the defensive fire and reduce the reload time. But I haven't bothered to do that. I guess I haven't been under enough consistent aerial attacks to feel like I feel an urgency to take this upgrade over the need to reduce the chance of flood and fire. But you may feel differently. Slot 3 is, again, an area where you will have a significant consideration, and I talked about this during the replay. When I first built her, I ran her with the main battery modification 2 to reduce her turret traverse. This gets it down to, I think, 30 seconds, which is quite good, or maybe it's a little more than 30 seconds. But at 36 seconds, you don't really need this. And taking the artillery plotting room upgrade to increase the range by 16%, like I said during the replay, to me was much more useful for me. And then the last slot, I took the damage control system upgrade to reduce the duration of floods and fires. You could take one of the other upgrades depending upon your playstyle. If you wanted the faster rudder, to torpedo beat, or if you wanted the propulsion modification to get faster acceleration, if you're playing at longer ranges and you're trying to sort of throttle your speed and throw off shots, that could also be useful as well. But as a battleship, I tend to take, or almost always take, the damage control system upgrade. As far as consumables, she gets a spotter, or she can mount a fighter as well. But because she has decent AA and she already has defensive fire, I feel having the spotting aircraft is more useful. Again, I tend not to use spotting aircraft for the extra range. I use it for better visibility on targets that are near terrain, that are still within my base firing range. It just gives me better visibility. And again, I mentioned here that she also carries the defensive fire consumable. All right, getting to my skills. So and again, I think I mentioned this, or I may have referred to this during the replay portion. I have recently made a change to some of my battleship commander specs to give me a little more, what I think might end up being a little more flexibility. So normally in a traditional tank concealment build, the 4 skills that are taken include basics of survivability, superintendent, fire prevention, and concealment. However, because I definitely want to have expert marksman and adrenaline rush, if I took basics of survivability as well, I would be limited to a single level 1 skill. And I really like having priority target because it tells me when I'm getting focused or if a destroyer may be targeting me with torpedoes. And so I wanted to be able to leverage the expert loader skill, especially since this is John Doe and he gets a buff skill. And I already talked about, with the smaller caliber battleship guns, being able to switch to another ammunition type efficiently can be very effective. So what I elected to do is drop basics of survivability, which extends my fire duration by about 8 seconds. And I picked up Jack of all trades, which one of the benefits is going to reduce the cooldown time on my damage control, which mostly recovers the time increased in the fire duration. In other words, my damage control will come up more quickly, and if I need to put out a fire, I give myself a little more flexibility there. And then that also again allows me to pick up expert loader. And on ships like the Florida or other battleships where switching ammunition types is valuable, so far this adjusted build for me has worked quite well. And I haven't found that giving up basics of survivability has caused me too much issues. The fire prevention is unquestionably incredibly valuable because it not only reduces the number of fires that can occur on a ship to 3, it also reduces the chance of catching fire by 10%. And that compound effect means fire survivability is much better than simply basics of survivability on its own. So again, this build for me so far has been working quite well. All right, let me go over real quickly to signals. Actually, yeah, I think that's going to cover it for skills. Let me go over to signals for a moment. So again, for battleships, this set of 6 is kind of this gold standard. November Foxtrot to reduce the cooldown on your consumables, Sierra Mike to improve your speed, India Delta to recover more health when you're using the repair party consumable, Juliet Yankee Botus 2 to reduce the duration of floods, India Yankee to reduce the duration of fires, and then the all-important Juliet Charlie signal, which I'm running low on right now. These two signals, the Sierra Mike and the Juliet Charlie, are the ones that at least among the combat signals that I use the most. So definitely going to need to restock on those. So that's how I would build her. So some final thoughts on this ship. Like I said at the beginning of the video, so far I have come to quite like this ship. I think it's going to be important for players to understand her limitations, especially with regard to her health pool and armor. And I apologize if I sound a little bit like a broken record, because she is not going to be able to tolerate punishment the same way that a lot of her peers can. And especially if she's facing upper tier battleships, she is going to be quite vulnerable. And so she kind of rides that edge between a full-fledged battleship and maybe a super cruiser in a way, or maybe a well-armored heavy cruiser. So just that's the main thing I would keep in mind. So if you're going to pick her up and play her, that would be the key factor in terms of her play style. Otherwise, I think she works well as a mid-range battleship. As a support battleship, she has a lot of good things going for her, and she can definitely support her team with good AA as well. So I hope you have enjoyed my review and assessment and first impressions of this brand new premium Tier 7 U.S. Navy battleship. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've picked her up, let us know what you've felt about her playstyle and so on. So with that, thanks so much for watching, and as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.